Hey everyone, Mr. Wader here, and today we're going to be starting off our next week and we're going over marine life and habitats. So the topics we're going to go over are the definition of what a living thing is and non-living is the opposite. We'll go over a definition of habitat, three main biomes or habitat types, pros and cons of those habitats, and talk about coral reefs for a little bit, and then why animals live in those marine habitats. So to start, we need to know what the difference between living and not living is. And living things follow these characteristics. First, they're all made up of cells. Second, they reproduce. Third, they're based on genetic code. Fourth, they grow and develop. Fifth, they obtain and use materials and energy. Sixth, they respond to their environment. Seven, they maintain a stable internal environment. That's called homeostasis, if you remember that from bio. And eight, or last, is they evolve over time. Now, would these things be easier for animals living in marine environments or in, say, terrestrial, that'd be land environments? And that's not the easiest question to answer at first glance, and we're going to see why in a minute, but there's a bunch of different habitats that we're going to be going over. So, to start, habitats are areas or environments where a species or organism lives in, and the three main ones are saltwater-based, freshwater-based, and land-based. That's terrestrial, marine, and freshwater down there. So at the bottom you can see the basic layout for those three. Freshwater ecosystems include things that live on the land as well, but they have to live by freshwater. So like dragonflies live part of their life in the water, for example. Same thing with frogs. Frogs can live on land, but they also live in the freshwater. The question is, which of these places is most hospitable, the best place to live? And for that to be the best place to live, you would want to have like a consistent temperature, easier to find food, shelter, oxygen, etc. So we're going to use this little chart here as a way to demonstrate that. And if you just think about it for a second, we live on land, right? So land is obviously the best, except not quite the case. In terms of food, saltwater is actually great. It depends on the ecosystem, but there's a lot of stuff mixed into the water. So imagine if you could eat by walking and opening your mouth, because you can do that if you live in the salt water, because there's stuff that lives in the water that is really small, like krill, plankton, algae, bacteria, etc. So if you're small enough, you can take advantage of that. Freshwater, there's less stuff like that. And on land, it's drastic from environment type to environment type. So desert versus rainforest. And the rainforest, if you're living in the canopy, it's super easy to find food. It's literally everywhere. There's bugs and stuff all over the place. You've got plants, fruit, etc. If you're in the desert, not so nice. Then you've got shelter. Saltwater is great, especially if you have coral reefs. And freshwater, there's less to protect you. So otherwise you're open to predation. You're going to get caught by something bigger than you. And it doesn't even have to live in the water. It could be like a bear or something. And then you've got land, which has lots of shelter, but again, it varies greatly. In terms of oxygen, oh, by the way, before I forget, that right there is great if you are looking for protection. Clownfish and other animals have all sorts of protection in salt water that you might not think about that easily. In terms of oxygen, salt water is not very good. It's pretty bad, especially because it's generally warmer than freshwater, although freshwater temperature can change more. Freshwater is higher oxygen because it's moving water, and you're necessarily going to be closer to the part of the water that's moving if you're in freshwater usually. You get circulation, so oxygen will go into the water. And then on land, it's by far the easiest. You've got oxygen everywhere. You could like look in a direction and you have breathable air. Well, hopefully. And then the last is temperature. Saltwater is pretty stable. Freshwater can change a lot, and it can freeze, which means certain things can't live in the same section of the environment it lives in, depending on the season sometimes. And then on land, it's drastically different by season, which leads to things like hibernation and migration events. So oddly enough, the most stable of those is saltwater. If you notice, it may not be the best in terms of getting oxygen, which you need, but everything else is pretty stable. So the three major marine habitats are oceans, coral reefs, and estuaries. Oceans are broken up into a bunch of smaller ones, but there's 5 major oceans. You've got Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, Arctic, and Southern Oceans. And if you take a look at the Arctic Ocean, it looks a little different, but it gets the job done. There's a lot that lives there, and you may not think about this, but the Arctic Ocean is an ocean. So there's a lot that's going on there that we wouldn't necessarily think about all the time. Coral reefs hold approximately a quarter of all marine species, and they're a keystone, meaning they hold ecosystems in balance altogether. And coral is super important because of that. And if you look at this picture, you can see that everything is based off of the coral there. There are fish hiding in the coral. There's all sorts of other stuff that lives in the coral. There are animals that will eat coral, like beaches that you walk on, by the way. If you didn't know this, parrotfish will eat coral and then poop it out, and that's their beaches. So if you don't believe me, Google it. And coral is dispersed all over the planet, but the main reefs that we're talking about are not deep sea coral. So this is the spread. Every dot there is a reef base. And then the last on the list is estuaries. Estuaries are where rivers and streams flow into the ocean. That's where you get fresh water and salt water mixing. And you can see like the path from the top there. You've got rivers that are leading into a big open water area. So then random facts. Last part here. Most of the world's volcanic activity takes place in oceans. The largest animal on the planet lives in the ocean. That's the blue whale. And over 90% of life on Earth lives in the ocean. And the last thing I wanted to show you.
Hi, my name is Joe Reesing. I'm at the Joint Institute for the Study of the Atmosphere and the Ocean at the University of Washington. I was the chief scientist on this expedition, so I led the cruise and the trip to the West Mata eruption. The video that you'll be looking at is large magma bubbles. They're about 3 feet across, and the bubbles are molten rock that are expanded under the gas pressure of magmatic gas. And the magmatic gas, we presume, is mostly water, and when the water is under the magma, it's at magmatic temperatures, thousands of degrees, and when it's suddenly cooled by coming in contact with seawater, the bubble bursts. So what excites me the most about this volcanic eruption is that that on planet Earth, this is a process happening all the time, and yet we have never seen it happening in quite this way.